In this class today, we will be studying the development of some of the major blood vessels in the body. I must agree that it is a bit complicated and quite confusing because of the appearances and disappearances, right, left all the time. We will try to simplify how to appreciate, at the same time remember the various changes that are taking place in this vascular tree during the development. If at all there is some topic where the student has to draw a somewhat rough sketch diagram, this is the topic. You will have to draw a diagram and then match it with the description so that you will have some idea of the developing blood vessels, and you should be able to retain this information. Also, it is essential and helpful to recall the gross anatomy of the heart, or in case you have already finished the study of thorax, it is better to recall the posterior mediastinum, the middle mediastinum, and all the parts of the mediastinum for that matter. And we will try to explain the various changes that are taking place in the developing blood vessels. This study also will help us to explain, for example, the difference in the origin of the common carotid arteries. As you know, the right common carotid arises from brachiocephalic trunk, whereas the left common carotid is a direct branch of arch of aorta. Same thing goes to the subclavian arteries. The right subclavian and left subclavian differ from each other in their origins. We should be able to explain why this is taking place like that. We'll keep these objectives in mind and let's proceed to the study of the blood vessels. We will be dealing with the arteries first, then we will move on to the veins. The blood vessels develop from mesenchymal cells. These mesenchymal cells are undifferentiated mesodermal cells. Mesenchyme and mesoderm should not be used synonymously. They are not the same. One is undifferentiated and the other one is properly differentiated when it is called mesoderm. Nevertheless, there are two processes by which the blood vessels do develop. We did make a mention in the study of the developing heart that a tube is formed by the adherence or coalescence of the cells themselves and take the shape of a future tube, which is solid to begin with, and later the process of recanalization takes place so that a lumen is formed. So the facing the lumen will be the tunica intima. If you remember the microscopy of the blood vessels, tunica adventitia, which is the outermost layer of the wall of the blood vessel, a tunica media, and finally the tunica intima. So it is the tunica intima that will be facing the blood. So both of them will be involved in cases of pathology of either the blood or the vessel. The angiogenesis is a process of branches given off from the existing blood vessels, and this process is called angiogenesis. We move on to the next slide. That is the major blood vessels like dorsal aorta and the cardinal veins. They take the first process, that is the vasculogenesis. They are the blood vessels which are formed first, and the rest, whether the branches or tributaries, as the case may be, they will be formed by angiogenesis. So both these processes are under the control of the genes, and they are called the EGF or endothelial growth factor, and other growth factors as well are involved in these two processes. Study this picture. Here it is showing or labeled as ventral aorta and a dorsal aorta. If you remember, the aorta itself is in the posterior mediastinum, at least the descending thoracic aorta and the abdominal aorta. They are all in the back of the body, in the posterior abdominal wall. That's why it's called dorsal aorta. As already mentioned, that all these blood vessels are formed in pairs, right and left, but since there is a lack of space within the abdomen or thorax, as the case may be, one of them has to disappear because both are doing the same function. We don't require two blood vessels doing the same function, so one will go. So that is the basic principle. If there is a dorsal aorta, then there should be a ventral aorta as well. Now, where is this ventral aorta? We have seen the primitive heart tube. The cranial most structure was truncus arteriosus, with its two blood vessels coming up from truncus arteriosus. So the beginning of the truncus is called ventral aorta. So this is a further description of the truncus arteriosus, which will give rise to the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. And so that is about the ventral aorta. The two dorsal aortae, they fuse in the midline and become a single vessel. That's what is shown on the left side. A communication will be developed between the ventral aorta and the dorsal aorta by a series of aortic arches which are seen in the pharyngeal arches. If you have studied the head and neck, the embryology of the neck, you might have known the various pharyngeal arches. First arch, second, third, fourth, fifth will disappear anyway, and the sixth. So each artery will have its own muscles derived from it, and all of them shall be supplied by the nerve of the arch, and it also some bones will be developing from an arch, and cartilage and ligaments, so on and so forth. In addition to all this, the arch mesoderm also will form an artery. It should be called arch artery, but some people call them aortic arches to confuse the student. Who shall call it arch artery? So first arch artery, second arch artery, and so on till we reach the sixth. So after sixth, the neck is over and the thorax is beginning, and these arteries in the thorax, they will be called the seventh intersegmental arteries. So after the sixth, the artery to follow is the seventh intersegmental arteries. These arch arteries on one side, as you can see in the picture, on one side they are connected to the ventral aorta, and on the other side with the dorsal aorta. As the time moves on, there are further changes which will take place in these arch arteries. The first arch artery is represented by maxillary artery. The second arch artery in fetal life only is represented by stapedial artery. Though most of the books say second arch artery is stapedial artery, it is controversial. You can refer to my article. You can Google for stapedial artery, an enigma by Venugopal Rao. I have discussed there why stapedial artery should not be the second arch artery. Nonetheless, we will not go into that. And then we are left with third, fourth and sixth arch arteries. Fifth arch artery, anyway, entire arch disappears. It appears for some time because possibly in the lower animals it was there as a functioning arch. We will see what's happening to the third arch, fourth arch on both sides, and also the sixth. As we come to the sixth arch artery is always associated with the developing lungs. So it is telling us that, look, I am going to form the pulmonary trunk, or the two branches of the pulmonary trunk, the right and left. So they will be entering the developing lung bud. But beyond that branch, going to the lung bud, the sixth arch artery continues and be attached to the dorsal aorta, and this connection, which is formed on both sides, is called ductus arteriosus. A very important structure. You might have seen a fibrous band connecting the left branch of the pulmonary trunk to the arch of aorta, around which the left recurrent laryngeal nerve hooks. And it's only seen on the left side, please remember. On the right side, this small portion called the ductus arteriosus will disappear. So sixth arch artery is nothing but it will give rise to the two branches of the pulmonary trunk, and then the other connection or a continuation of it is called the ductus arteriosus, which will disappear on the right side. It will persist on the left side. We will come back to explain why it is persisting on the left. It's not that it cannot persist on the right side. Some cases do. Because of this difference in the existence of the ductus arteriosus, the left recurrent laryngeal nerve will be hooking around the ligamentum arteriosum, sixth arch artery rather, and on the right side, because it has disappeared, so the next available artery will be the fourth arch artery, which will become a part of subclavian. So the right recurrent laryngeal will hook around the subclavian artery. Please remember, right recurrent laryngeal nerve hooks around the right subclavian artery. The left recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is longer, understandably because it's coming from the thorax, and then it is ascending to the neck to supply the left vocal cord, and it will be hooking around the ligamentum arteriosum, which is a remnant of ductus arteriosus. I have given a table at the end of this to summarize which arch artery will form what in adult life. Just go through and if possible make a note of it, write down, and because it may be asked, suppose the external carotid artery is asked and they may ask you to add a note on its development. So a single sentence should be suffice for that. So we have reduced the number of arteries in the neck to 3 pairs now: third arch artery, fourth, right and left, and sixth. And sixth arch artery we have studied now, the 2 branches of the pulmonary trunk, and the continuation is called the ductus arteriosus, which will persist on the left side and disappears on the right side. So now we have to deal with the third and fourth arch arteries. This is a small animation to show the dorsal and ventral aortae and the remaining main arteries, third, fourth and sixth, and how they will be attached to the ventral aorta and the aortic sac. And as the heart descends, they will attain their permanent positions as visible in the gross anatomy or in the adults. Just appreciate this animation. Now we will come to the description of these dorsal and ventral aortae. So the dorsal aorta, in fact it is the one that shall form later on the descending thoracic aorta and the abdominal aorta. So in the beginning there are 2 dorsal aortae, right and left, which have fused in caudally to form a single trunk, and this is also reflected in the adult anatomy. If you remember, the arch of aorta and it curves down to form the descending thoracic aorta, which will be on the left side of the vertebral bodies of the middle thoracic vertebrae, and gradually it comes to the midline. That is the explanation that the 2 dorsal aortae have fused to become a single vessel in the midline. Till the fusion, the dorsal aorta is indeed on the left side of the vertebral thoracic vertebrae. In these vertebrae, we can also see on the sides of the vertebral bodies there is a well-marked groove due to the pulsating aorta. And caudally they fuse to form a single trunk, but cranially, if we extend beyond the attachment of the arch arteries, it will go into the head and then it becomes internal carotid arteries. So, question: how the internal carotid arteries develop? Your answer shall be by the dorsal aorta beyond the first arch artery, a continuation of the dorsal aorta into the head to form the internal carotid artery. Coming to the ventral aorta is nothing but the further extension of truncus arteriosus. So there are two ends of the truncus, as we can see on the right side of the diagram, and which will be called the right and left horns, and which spring from the distal portion of the truncus arteriosus. That means if we trace the truncus arteriosus cranially, it will be called aortic sac, and its two horns shall be called the right and left horns of the aortic sac. And so together it will become the ventral aorta. So the two arteries which are springing from the truncus arteriosus, you should refer to the primitive heart tube now. We have mentioned truncus arteriosus only with two arteries, and now we will call them the two ventral aorta. And the two ventral aorta, if we trace them towards the truncus, then that portion shall be called the aortic sac. So once they are formed, these ventral aorta will be attached to the dorsal aorta by the arch arteries. In this diagram, we can see on the left side the further description of the truncus arteriosus if we trace it cranially. So how it forms the aortic sac and the ventral aorta, the right and left horns of the aortic sac. These are all nothing but the parts of truncus arteriosus itself. If the truncus arteriosus, as you know, it divides to form aorta and the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk is of a different system altogether. So now we have to concentrate only on the arterial portion of the truncus, that is the ventral aorta, and how these arch arteries will be establishing connection with this part of the ventral aorta. On the right side, we can see the arch artery, the pharyngeal arch arteries, first, second, third, fourth, and sixth, and they are connected on one side to the ventral aorta, and on the other side they are connecting to the dorsal aorta. Well, this is a recap of what I have discussed so far. The arch arteries, how they connect. Well, this is a recap of what I have been talking to you so far. The pharyngeal arch arteries are numbered from craniocaudally into first arch artery, second, third, fourth, and sixth arch arteries, and they are followed by next artery is the seventh intersegmental arteries. Don't get confused between this called ductus caroticus, also called carotid duct by some authors, between this and ductus arteriosus. Ductus caroticus is a part of the dorsal aorta itself. Ductus arteriosus is a connection between the sixth arch artery, that is the pulmonary trunk, right and left branches, to the dorsal aorta. That is the significance, and from here the two ductus caroticus will disappear on both sides. Nonetheless, it will appear in the early stages of the development. This is the fate of the arch arteries. I think I have already mentioned. The first arch artery is represented by maxillary artery, and which you might have studied in the infratemporal fossa. And second arch artery is, of course, controversial. I think I have already mentioned, but most of the textbooks say that it is represented by stapedial artery, though it is not correct. The third arch artery becomes the common carotid, and fourth arch artery, as I told you, it forms the left side. On the left side, a part of the arch of aorta. On the right side, it will form a part of the subclavian artery. What we have seen in the truncus arteriosus, the first two arteries which are coming, and they are the right and left horns. So the right horn of the aortic sac forms the brachiocephalic trunk, and the left horn forms a part of arch of aorta. We have studied we have made a mention about the dorsal aortae, right and left, which have fused in the midline to form a single trunk. So from that junction till its beginning, on the right side, the dorsal aorta will disappear. So we will have only the left dorsal aorta. Hence we see that the arch of aorta will be arching to the left side, and similarly for some distance the descending thoracic aorta is on the left side of the median plane before it comes to the midline. So right dorsal aorta will disappear, the left side will persist. As you know, the subclavian artery is of different origins on the right and left sides. On the right side, it's a branch of brachiocephalic trunk, and on the left side, it's a direct branch coming from arch of aorta. This difference is because of the embryological reasons. On the left side, the entire left subclavian artery is derived from the left intersegmental artery, whereas on the right side, it develops from right fourth arch artery, which is a mirror image of the arch of aorta, and with a portion of the right intersegmental artery, and also a part of the right dorsal aorta. So right subclavian artery has multiple origins in its development, that is the right fourth arch artery, right intersegmental artery, and also a small part of the right dorsal aorta. In this diagram, we can concentrate on the development of the subclavian artery. As you can see on the left side, it's coming from the seventh intersegmental artery only, whereas on the right side, it has multiple origins, as we can see that. And we have already given the description. So the right subclavian is coming from right fourth arch artery, right seventh intersegmental artery, and a small part of the right dorsal aorta before it disappears. Well, in this slide we are talking once again about the sixth arch artery, which is always associated with the lungs, so it is becoming the two branches of the pulmonary trunk, right and left, and how it is attached to the dorsal aorta by ductus arteriosus, which will persist on the left side and disappears on the right side, thereby causing the relationship changes of the recurrent laryngeal nerve. This also I have mentioned in the previous slides. This is a further recap of the sixth arch artery. If you remember that the sixth arch artery is always associated with the developing lung bud, that means we know that it will be connected to the pulmonary trunk. And so sixth arch artery, just say, what does it give rise to is the question, and you will say the two branches of the pulmonary trunk. Coming to the congenital anomalies involving the arteries, since the aortic arch of aorta is formed on both sides, and on the right side it will disappear, on the left side it will persist. But if both persist, then we have two aortic arches. So then that condition is called the double aortic arch, which is seen in some lower animals. It's a regular feature, and sometimes the right dorsal aorta, instead of disappearing, it will persist. So we will see that the descending thoracic aorta and abdominal aorta, the descending thoracic aorta to be precise, will be on the right side instead of on the left. And the other anomaly is the abnormal origin of the right subclavian artery coming from arch of aorta, which is on the left. This is what I told you during the development of these blood vessels. The right and left will be causing us some sort of confusion. If we think logically, the right subclavian artery, which is going to supply the right upper limb, but is coming from the arch of aorta, which is arching to the left. So from the left side, it has to cross the midline and come to the right upper limb. So it does so by passing behind the esophagus, thereby compressing the esophagus, and it gives rise to a condition called dysphagia lusoria, where the patient will be complaining of severe dysphagia because the esophagus is being compressed by the abnormal right subclavian artery. This is a schematic diagram to show the various congenital anomalies, especially the abnormal right subclavian artery. I don't think that it is coming higher up on the right side, no, but once they take their final positions, this will be coming from the arch of aorta beyond the left subclavian artery. If you remember the three branches of the arch of aorta in adults, starting from right to left, is the brachiocephalic trunk, then left common carotid and left subclavian. And in anomalous conditions, there is another subclavian artery close to the left subclavian artery, and then it will turn to the right side behind the esophagus. The other congenital anomaly is the PDA, or patent ductus arteriosus. The ductus arteriosus is in fact a shunt mechanism during the fetal circulation. Whatever blood that is entering the right ventricle is shunted into pulmonary trunk and beyond to the lungs. But the lungs don't require that much of blood. They do require a little bit for survival. So much of the blood that is destined to go to the lung buds is shunted back into systemic circulation by the ductus arteriosus. That's why it's an important channel. In fact, in fetal life, it is almost as wide as the pulmonary trunk itself. And postnatally, once the child is born, the ductus arteriosus will collapse by the proliferation of the tunica intima, which depends on the level of oxygen changes between the pulmonary trunk and the arch of aorta, and gradually this process of collapse is called involution, and the ductus arteriosus involutes and becomes a ligament, which we have seen in the adult heart as a small fibrous band connecting the left branch of the pulmonary trunk to the arch of aorta. We call it ligamentum arteriosum, but in certain cases the ductus arteriosus remains open, remains patent, and such a condition is called patent ductus arteriosus. So as you know, then there will be an admixture of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. It can cause the cyanosis and other problems. As we are here, a small information about the various bypass mechanisms. The philosophy is that the pulmonary circulation has to be reduced, and much of the blood, as much as possible, it should be shunted into systemic circulation, because many of the organs, especially the brain, they are developing and they require more blood. So these bypass mechanisms or shunt mechanisms, or number one is foramen ovale, which we have studied in the development of the heart, where the much of the blood from the right heart is shunted to the left. So this is one mechanism. The other one is, just now we have talked about ductus arteriosus, how it is shunting the blood from the pulmonary circulation or the pulmonary trunk itself to the arch of aorta, so that the blood will enter the systemic circulation. The other bypass channel, which you might have seen if you have studied the liver, there is a fibrous band called ligamentum venosum. In fact, it was also a functioning tube in the fetal life, that's called ductus venosus. This ductus venosus also does the same, since the liver doesn't require much of blood which is coming through the portal vein, so it will shunt this blood from the liver to the inferior vena cava. So from there, the shunt, from there it will go to the left ventricle and so on. So ductus venosus is another bypass channel. Well, all these bypass channels shall be closed, shall become ligaments. We will see in some other time, during some other time. These are called the postnatal changes, or changes in the circulation after birth. Once the child takes the first respiration, the lungs start functioning, so the pressure, the blood is returning to the left atrium, the pressure in the left atrium will increase, and this increase in pressure of the left atrium shall obliterate the foramen ovale, which later becomes fossa ovalis. And ductus arteriosus, which was shunting blood into the arch of aorta, into the systemic circulation rather, it will become a ligament, and we call it ligamentum arteriosum, or some American authors nowadays they say arterial ligament. Similarly, the ductus venosus, which was shunting blood from the liver to inferior vena cava, also will be obliterated, and it will become ligamentum venosum, which you have seen in the liver. There are two fissures, fissure for ligamentum teres, and if you continue it cranially, it will become continuous with this, that is ligamentum venosum. And similarly, coming from the placenta, there are two umbilical arteries. In fact, these are the continuations of the internal iliac arteries of the fetus. So these two arteries will become umbilical ligaments. If you have opened up the anterior abdominal wall, you might have seen these two ligaments in the region of the umbilicus on the inner aspect of the anterior abdominal wall. These are called the umbilical ligaments, medial umbilical ligaments. This is an additional information about the processes which are involved in the closure of the ductus arteriosus. And as soon as the baby is born, the ductus arteriosus will show the contraction in its muscular wall. It was indeed an artery, please remember. After all, it is coming from the sixth arch artery. So it is like an artery. So its muscle contracts, and which is mediated by bradykinin, that is released from the fetal lungs as soon as it takes the first respiration. So it will take some time to obliterate, because it has the oxygen levels have to be adjusted to the new lung breathing, and it may take 1 to 3 months to completely obliterate the ductus arteriosus. There is a umbilical vein which is at this stage. Let us recall the umbilical cord will have 3 blood vessels. One is a left umbilical vein, which is bringing rich blood from the mother, from the placenta to the fetus, and to take the waste from the fetus to the placenta are the 2 umbilical arteries. So 2 arteries, 1 vein, please remember, though initially there are 2 veins, but right umbilical vein will disappear, leaving the left umbilical vein. They fondly describe it as left is left behind. And this left umbilical vein quite naturally will be extending from the umbilicus to the liver, and it will become obliterated, which you have seen as ligamentum teres. It's called ligamentum teres hepatis, or round ligament of liver, which is in the falciform ligament in its lower border. And so the question is, what is ligamentum teres? Then your answer shall be an obliterated left umbilical vein, and you will be correct. Here we have got a table to describe the fate or the formation or development of the various arteries which we have discussed so far. I advise all of you to make a note and write down so that you will remember. Coming to the arch of aorta, it has to come from the aortic sac, that is ventral part. Then it has to turn to the left, so that means left horn of the aortic sac, and then the 4th arch artery is still we have not accounted for, so left 4th arch artery, and finally this will give rise to the arch of aorta. So these are the 3 sources from the ventral part of the aortic sac, and then the left horn of the aortic sac, and the left 4th arch artery. Brachiocephalic trunk, thankfully, it derived from the right horn of the aortic sac. Left horn is giving rise to arch of aorta, so its counterpart will be the brachiocephalic trunk. No wonder it gives off the right common carotid and right subclavian. So right horn of the aortic arch will become the brachiocephalic trunk. The right subclavian vein artery we have already discussed, the right fourth arch artery and the distal part of the right seventh intersegmental artery. Left subclavian comes straight from the left seventh intersegmental artery only, and the third arch artery will become the common carotid, which will give off a bud called external carotid artery. Internal carotid artery, we have mentioned the continuation of the dorsal aorta beyond the attachment of the first arch artery. And pulmonary arteries, again, once again, sixth arch artery, and descending aorta. Now, where the arch of aorta ends, the descending aorta shall begin. So, the part of the left dorsal aorta and distal part of the fused dorsal aorta, where it forms a single median artery. So, till that fusion, the descending aorta is derived mainly from the left dorsal aorta, and with a small contribution from the left fourth arch artery. Better write down. Here we have got another list of the other arteries which are coming from the dorsal aorta. In adults, if you remember, the branches of the dorsal aorta, like the intercostals and the phrenic arteries, and from the abdominal aorta are the visceral branches. So embryonic structures are called the somatic branches, which are going to the body wall. So somatic intersegmental, they come from the posterolateral part of the dorsal aorta. So coming from them will be the arteries of the upper lower limbs, and then the intercostals coming to thorax. Then you come to the abdomen, it will be the lumbar arteries, and come down still lateral sacral arteries. So they are all supplying the somatic branches. Coming to the splanchnos means viscera. They also are the lateral branches. So the diaphragm is supplied by the phrenic arteries. On the thoracic side, it is supplied by the superior phrenic, and on the abdominal aspect, it is by the inferior phrenic arteries. Then the next branches are the adrenal arteries are suprarenal. Then come down a bit, it's renal arteries. And since we say urogenital system, so the gonadal arteries, either testicular or ovarian, are also derived from the dorsal aorta, which later becomes abdominal aorta. Then coming to the ventral splanchnic branches, which are supplying the gut. So these are the single branches in the midline. Coming from the front of the aorta, if you see the celiac trunk, which is supplying the foregut and its derivatives, superior mesenteric artery to supply all the derivatives of the midgut, and inferior mesenteric, which will supply the hindgut derivatives. We will be studying about them in the next class. I think we have already mentioned, if I am not mistaken, GIT 1. And finally, the umbilical arteries, which we have studied just now, and they will become the superior vesical arteries. Vesica urinaria is the anatomical name of the urinary bladder. So we call anything related to the urinary bladder as vesicle. So superior vesicle, inferior vesicle, and so on. So far we are concentrating on the head and neck, thorax and abdomen. Now what about the limbs? So each limb will be supplied by one artery called the axis artery, and each artery this axis artery is derived from the intersegmental arteries only, because there is no neck now. These are all segmented parts, especially the thorax and also to certain extent the abdomen. The axis artery is called axis artery because it runs in the central axis of the limb. Coming to the upper limb, as you know, it is the subclavian artery. After supplying the root to the neck and giving off the very important branches like internal thoracic or internal mammary artery, which is of quite a great considerable significance in females, and also another important artery called the vertebral artery to supply the brain along with the internal carotid. And then it continues into the upper limb through the axilla, where it will change its name to axillary artery. So the axis artery of the upper limb is the subclavian artery, which is nothing but the seventh cervical intersegmental artery. And in the adults, this axis artery is represented by the axillary artery. Then it continues as a brachial artery. Brachial artery may divide into radial and ulnar arteries, but these have come later. It has to be in the midline, almost in the midline, in the central axis of the upper limb. So we should not consider anything coming on the sides of the main artery. So brachial artery, then it gives off the, one of the branches will give off the anterior interosseous artery from ulnar. And if we continue this into the palm, a part of the deep palmar arch is described as the remnant of the axis artery of the upper limb. Coming to the lower limb, the axis artery runs on the back of the lower limb, so it's in the gluteal region. So you might have seen the inferior gluteal artery, which comes below the piriformis, accompanied by the inferior gluteal nerve. And there is another small artery called arteria comithentis nervi sciatici, or the companion artery of the sciatic nerve. If you have dissected the structures undercover of gluteus maximus, which is a wrong term anyway, these are anterior to the gluteus maximus really. And this small artery also represents the axis artery. It indeed sinks into the substance of the sciatic nerve. Then later on, if we come down into the popliteal fossa, so a part of the popliteal artery above the popliteus, and the peroneal artery, and a part of plantar arch. These are the representatives of the original axis artery that is derived from fifth intersegmental L5 artery. So that means femoral artery is not the axis artery. Please remember, most probably because of the rotation of the lower limb in an opposite direction to that of the upper limb, the axis artery will be on the back of, that is in the gluteal region, popliteal fossa, and the back of the leg, where we find the peroneal artery. So it comes from L5. The femoral artery has been derived from the main trunk, but it is not the axis artery. Having studied the development of the arteries, it's time to move on to the veins. This will be a bit more confusing than the arteries themselves. We shall try to find a way to simplify and how to understand, how to remember. That is the main point. First time I am going against my principle that we should not study anything in anatomy, keeping the exams in the point of view, but here I must say that I surrender. We will have to study keeping the impending exams in sight. While studying the heart, we have made a mention about sinus venosus, how it has a body and two horns, right and left, and which will be receiving three sets of primitive veins, a pair coming from the placenta, they are called the umbilical veins, a pair coming from yolk sac are called the vitelline veins, and finally coming from the body wall, they are called the anterior and posterior cardinal veins. Cardinal is the principal veins, main veins, the cardinals of the church, you know. And these are the three primitive veins in pairs, which will be opening into the corresponding horns of sinus venosus. This is a diagrammatic representation of what we have studied so far. There is an anterior cardinal vein and a posterior cardinal vein, which are placed much laterally, and most medial, flanking the gut, duodenum to be precise, are the vitelline veins, and in between, interposed between them, will be the umbilical veins. That's the order from lateral to medial: cardinal veins, umbilical vein, and most medial shall be. They have to be very close to the gut, you must remember. Please remember the portal vein, if you have come to the posterior abdominal wall, how it is formed by the union of splenic vein, which is coming from left, superior mesenteric also sweeping from the left side to the right side. Both of them join behind the neck of the pancreas, posterior to the neck of pancreas, and the pancreas itself is molded around the concavity or within the concavity of duodenum. So the close relationship with the duodenum cannot be forgotten. If you have studied the thorax, you shall see that the big veins, or almost all the veins, are the big veins, like vena cava, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. In fact, they are almost in the same line. They are, in fact, the azygous system of veins. All these veins are on the right side of the body. The nature has selected the right side of the body for the veins, but the veins are formed in pairs, right and left, so it is obvious and imperative that the left-sided veins have to cross the midline to pour their blood into the right-sided systems. So there will be a cross communications which will be quite longer than their counterparts. Remember the left brachiocephalic vein, which is quite long indeed, because it has to come to the right side, crossing the midline to join its partner to form the superior vena cava. Same thing goes in the thorax. The left-sided azygous system, which is called the hemiazygous system, also will cross the midline by cross communications and pour their blood into the azygous vein. Still you come down, the left common iliac, which is formed by the external and internal iliac veins on the left side, it will cross the midline and joins the right common iliac to form the inferior vena cava. So basically the right side of the body, right heart or right atrium, you can see it is a venous chamber. receiving the great veins, superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So all of them, all the veins, they have taken the right side of the body. So the arteries are given the left side of the body, which is also evident. You can see that the arch of aorta arches to the left and descends on the left side of the thoracic vertebrae, mid-thoracic, and then it will gradually come to the midline and comes to the front of the thoracic vertebrae before it pierces the diaphragm to become abdominal aorta. So left side of the body is for arteries, right side of the body is for the veins. That's the point to understand. We will take up the major veins, important veins. Portal vein is a regularly asked question for you because of its involvement in the clinical scenarios or clinical cases, its importance, and then how it is implicated in, especially in the cirrhosis of liver, and where the portocaval anastomotic sites and all these, and along with that description of the gross anatomy with its formation, relations and all. Usually it is asked to please add a note on its development. Then we will go back to the primitive veins which are very close to the duodenum, that is vitelline veins, right and left. These two vitelline veins communicate with each other by three anastomotic channels. One is proximal, that is ventral, that is in front of the duodenum. Then one anastomotic channel or a cross communication behind the duodenum, and another distal which is also ventral. So there are three cross connections connecting the right and left vitelline veins. So two ventral and one dorsal. Dorsal means posterior, ventral means anterior. The superior mesenteric vein and the splenic vein, they develop independently and they will be uniting with the left vitelline vein just below the dorsal anastomosis. We will see a diagram. The point to understand is that superior mesenteric and splenic veins are not developed from vitelline veins. That's the point. If you see this diagram, the A is showing the situation of the vitelline veins on either side of the developing duodenum, and they move on cranially and enter the liver and will divide into two, both of them. And both these vitelline veins will be joined by three anastomotic channels. The proximal is within the substance of the liver, as you can see that. Middle is on the back of duodenum. Understandably, this should persist if portal vein has to go behind the duodenum, and the distalmost connecting channel is also in the front. That is what is showing in B. C and D, now he will deal with the various disappearances of the portions of the vitelline veins and how they give rise to the portal vein in adults. Let's concentrate on the C of this diagram. We can see that on the left side, the left vitelline vein up to the attachment of the splenic and superior mesenteric veins, whatever portion is here, it will disappear. Once it disappears, there is no point in having an anastomotic channel, so that also will go. And once it is gone, the right vitelline vein also will disappear. The portion of the right vitelline vein up to the dorsal anastomosis. Right? So this is what is happening. So now the portal vein is formed by splenic and superior mesenteric veins, number one, and then it is crossing behind involving the dorsal venous anastomosis and the right vitelline vein up to the liver, where it will divide into two. So the division or the left branch of the portal vein is involving the proximal anastomotic channel. So that's how we can also say that the left branch of the portal vein shall be longer because it is formed from the entire anastomosis, proximal anastomotic channel. This left branch of the portal vein is connected to the inferior vena cava by the ductus venosus, which will be shunting the blood destined to go to the left lobe of the liver into inferior vena cava. It is always said that the left lobe of the liver cannot keep pace in development with the right lobe. So the right lobe getting its own blood supply, there is no problem, no shunt. But the left branch, it's suffering a transient ischemia, and that's why the left lobe appears to be smaller. And in extreme cases, which I had the good fortune to see, the entire left lobe is absent and is replaced by a fibrous band, which rather warmly called appendix of liver. So whenever they ask you why the right lobe is larger and left lobe is smaller, so you must tell them that it's because of the shunt mechanism called ductus venosus, which was connecting the left branch of the portal vein to the inferior vena cava, and because of this shunt, the left lobe doesn't get as much of blood as the right lobe, so it appears to be smaller in size, though functionally both of them are of equal volume. That's a different issue. This is what you are expected to write when you are asked add a note on the development of the portal vein. So draw a sketch diagram as I told you, two vertical lines, and in between you keep duodenum and join them with ventral dorsal with an interrupted line, dorsal anastomotic channel, and liver you can draw like an alphabet L and join them and start to describe. So the caudal portion of the left vitelline vein will disappear, and the dorsal, the anastomosis, middle dorsal anastomosis will give rise to the portal vein, and also the part of right vitelline vein between the dorsal and the proximal ventral anastomosis. Proximal anastomosis, which we have seen as the left branch of the portal vein. Coming to the superior vena cava, let's remember that superior vena cava is formed by the union of right brachiocephalic and left brachiocephalic veins, and the left brachiocephalic vein is longer, as I told you, that it has to cross the midline to join its partner on the right side, and we have also described that how the major veins are found on the right side of the body. So the first part of, rather the upper part of the superior vena cava is formed from right anterior cardinal vein. It's caudal to the oblique transverse anastomosis with the left anterior cardinal vein, and the second part will also use the duct of Cuvier. Second part develops from the right common cardinal vein. So these two, please remember in case you are asked. The congenital anomalies will fall into the logical sequence. There may be, if there is no the oblique anastomotic channel, which was supposed to be represented by the left brachiocephalic vein, if it disappears, then we have got two double superior vena cavae. So there is a left superior vena cava as well, and that will join the coronary sinus, which is coming from left horn of sinus venosus before it opens into the right atrium. And sometimes the right superior vena cava, that is the anterior cardinal vein, will disappear, and the oblique channel that is supposed to connect. So both the upper limbs will drain their blood into left superior vena cava, and it will open into the coronary sinus. It doesn't matter. Should not matter really. So these are the congenital anomalies of superior vena cava due to the disappearances of the oblique channel, that is double vena cava, double superior vena cava, and there may be only left superior vena cava. That's because the right anterior cardinal vein disappears and the oblique communication now will join the left. That means, as I told you, both the upper limbs as well as the internal jugular, so they form the brachiocephalic vein. So they will be draining into the left side. Now we will come to the most complex structure to develop, is the inferior vena cava. You will remember that the inferior vena cava is mainly derived from the posterior cardinal veins, that is number one. Then it's on the right side of the abdominal aorta, and initially there are two posterior cardinal veins because they are paired primitive veins, and they will be developing close to the temporary kidney called mesonephros, and so they will be getting blood from the caudal part of the embryo. The external and internal iliac veins, which are deriving blood from the pelvis and the lower limb, right and left, so they will be joining. So they are not from the posterior cardinal veins, mind you, and they will be joining the corresponding posterior cardinal veins. And as I told you, the veins on the left side have to come to the right side because of the natural selection. So a cross communication is a must, and so a cross communication shall develop above the level of the iliac veins, joining the right and left posterior cardinal veins. So this cross communication obviously will become the left common iliac vein, which is longer than the right. Then next step is the formation of subcardinal veins in close, once again related to mesonephros. Let us say these are going to be the renal veins in later life, in later stages of development. So there are two subcardinal veins, understandably, which will be joined to each other. This is called subcardinal anastomosis. That means this cross communication shall become the left renal vein. If you have seen, naturally the left renal vein has to be longer than the right because it has to cross the midline to open into the inferior vena cava, which is on the right side of the midline. Along with that, there are two other channels, other veins, which are somewhat lateral to the subcardinal veins, and these new veins are called supracardinal veins. So we have got now posterior cardinal veins, then a cross communication, and then a pair of subcardinal veins which have communicated with each other, and then another pair has developed. They are called the supracardinal veins. Finally, this is what you have to remember and reproduce in case you are quizzed upon in the exams. It develops from 6 components. From below upwards or caudal to cranial, we always trace the veins like that. We follow the venous blood flow direction while describing the veins. We have veins are described towards the heart. That's the basics. So caudalmost part of the inferior vena cava is also called the sacrocardinal segment. Then since it is on the right side, so right supracardinal vein. Finally, right supracardinal subcardinal anastomosis, and the right subcardinal vein itself, which is called the renal segment, and then it passes behind the liver, forming 2 channels. One is called right hepatocardiac channel, and that itself will form the hepatic segment. We will see a diagram in the next slide to verify these components, 6 components which give origin to the inferior vena cava. A schematic diagram starting from the left extreme, the 2 posterior cardinal veins, right and left, and the independently formed external and internal iliac veins will join the corresponding posterior cardinal veins, and there is a cross communication between the 2 posterior cardinal veins, and cranial to this communication is number 1, that is called the sacrocardinal segment. So of the right common cardinal vein. Next we will move still cranially. Immediately parallel and connected to the posterior cardinal veins are the supracardinal veins, right and left. Then still more, there is another set of veins called the subcardinal veins, right and left, which are joined by each other, intersubcardinal anastomosis, and the supracardinals also will be connected to the subcardinal system of veins. Then we will still move cranially. So there is the subcardinal vein is connected to a channel called hepatocardiac channel, a new channel. Then with the disappearance of most of the veins on the left side, the final figure we have got is the sacrocardinal segment number 1, and number 2 is subcardinal, supracardinal anastomosis, and the right subcardinal vein and the right hepatocardiac channels. So together we have got this inferior vena cava developing from the various sources. I also advise you to draw a sketch diagram. I have told you in the beginning of the class itself, it's always better than start to work it out, which are the portions, and finally we will reach the 6 components which give origin or which take part in the development of the inferior vena cava. Thank you very much.